Hi everybody, this is Leo Volont with a relatively short and formal piece I shall call Idealization and the Left-Hand Path. Yes, if this subject intrigues you, well, I elaborated the philosophy of it more completely in my Creating a Better God series. And in my longer series, The White Light Paramahansa Swan Dream, I lay out how my life had channeled me into the left-hand path. I will also discuss the spiritual qualities of the cerebellum as distinct from our conscious mind that resides within our cerebral cortex. But the more complete treatment of the subject can be found in my more recent Ego, Soul, and the Two Minds video. I'll leave links down in the description. So yes, hey, thank you for clicking on, but now let me get started. The big return on the left-hand path is life at its fullest. That is, in proportion to the extent to which we had nurtured our ideals. We do exactly the opposite of what the transcendentalists do with their spiritualized complacency toward inequality distinctions. Then even while we certainly see them in more swimming pools than sewage pipes, they have a doctrine of positive disdain for any other aesthetic ideals other than their own ideal of rejecting all ideals as baseless or illusory. Thus, in their living through their lives, while rejecting all that life has to offer, well, they live as though they're dead already. But for us, well, living as though we're dead can wait until last, until we're really dead. When all that the transcendentalist renounces for and struggles against the grain to attain comes as the fulfillment of a spiritually natural process. That when we are finally reduced to nothingness, when death causes the dissolution of the body, well, then we will finally be enabled to appreciate the undifferentiated, unchanging, and eternal nothingness. Certainly when that is the only thing we have left. So in the eternity of time, what's the hurry? Until then, while God-given life still animates us, we can find bliss by living for our aesthetic ideals. No, not as those prone to transcendentalism would do, who place the faculty of consciousness over all other spiritual attributes, for then, well, as would logically follow, they couldn't go any further than just being passive spectators to life. For us, we see the seats of our soul in will to action, not in mere consciousness. Consciousness may sometimes even just get in the way. Many of the greatest martial artists went through their most astounding feats in consciousness blackouts. Their seat of will apparently not wishing the word-encoding ego mind to interrupt any of the real action with its slow background pinging of thoughts that are often enough off-key to the flow of the unfolding situation. You know, being at cross purposes to our essential will that not only lives to survive, but to survive beautifully. So for us, we focus our will upon achieving some ideal, honing our aesthetic vision down to the core of psychologically appealing archetypes. These archetypes had developed within our genetic coding over trillions of generations, going all the way back to the first organization of life, where a corporation of molecules got together to move in a chosen direction in order to absorb what it could then use to make it bigger and healthier. All such archetypes are basically quintessential, even if clothed in elaborations unique to time, mood, and place. Now consider what that must feel like for a spiritual person throughout their body and mind, being able to achieve, to embody, to be some avatar of the ideal, any ideal. I believe that is what the saints were because of actions they had taken, proving they were more creatures of a providential divine will than only of mere divine consciousness.
The ideals of the saints were noble in their humanitarianism, idealizing nurturing the needy. My innovation here is to point our path of willful idealization towards what we hope we may enjoy. Yes, of course, the religious ideals of altruism, service, and charity are the most noble of ideals. But they are not the only category of the ideal which we need heed. No. Many to most of us hear other callings and are drawn down different paths, and it's okay that we follow them. You see, I had a lesson in life when I was still quite young enough to still be among the elementary school children in my family's Protestant church's Sunday school. Though I later converted to Catholicism to be more in concordance to the ideal of a high medieval Marian Catholicism and the culture of a civilization that had called itself Christendom. But what the Sunday school did was that they took us to the state's insane asylum. That was in the days back before One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, when madness was still institutionalized rather than being released out on the streets for the sake of personal freedom, but then having to be cycled through the jails whenever the poor lunatics would go into crisis. Well, once this tour into this den of insanity commenced, I was horrified by the sights and especially by the stench. It was as though we descended into one of Dante's rings of purgatory. It was then that I made a startling personal discovery, that it seemed as though only I myself had been the only one so affected. The other kids had either a stoic resignation to this horror, or they were simply insensitive to it. But I couldn't stand it. I ran for the exit, being desperately glad that nobody tried to stop me. When I got outside, I joined up with some of the church ladies out by the bus. One of them, Mrs. Mitchell, as respectable as any church lady ever could be, well, she saw the worry in my face, that I'd suspected that I'd somehow disgraced myself by retreating out of that ghastly hell on earth. And so she gave me a wry, consoling smile and told me, "Leo, sweetheart, you're okay. Look at all of us. We couldn't go in there either. Being sensitive is a blessing from God. And while suffering might come into our lives, as no life can be totally free of some suffering, well, it's okay that the good Lord did not call you to seek it out. It's no sin to be more comfortable with the good and the beautiful than with the stark and the ugly." So I personally pursue idealizations in the arts and music. But that is probably only because I wasn't a born athlete, or I would have probably put much more emphasis on sport. Uh, I almost forgot. I used to be a motorhead. Yes, in my adolescence, my passion was flying, and I got a federal private pilot's license as soon as I was old enough to qualify for it. But as an adult, my sporting favorite became sport touring motorcycles. Twisty canyon and mountain roads going much faster than the speed limit. The ideal I was shooting for was the optimization between risk and caution with the view for maximizing the fun. Yes, every time you have fun, it's because you're touching some ideal, or the ideal is touching you. It's like the hand of God reaching down to pet a kitten. So, how can that not be holy? Yes, it's perhaps ironic that the only way that the transcendentalists can blame us is by first rejecting all aesthetic criteria, except for the one where the desiring of positive emotional outcomes is somehow considered to be a bad thing. You know, as per the first principle of Buddhism, which states that desire is the source of all suffering. Probably because the spoiled Prince Gautama, having been surfeited by unappreciated and therefore undeserved pleasures for his entire life, somehow became blind to the fact that desire is also the wellspring of every aesthetic ideal. That is, everything done by voluntary action that brings emotional joy. And the last one is dead to it as was the Buddha. So yes, the knowledge that the left-hand path offers does not come in terms of what to think, but in what to do. The seat of the soul is in the cerebellum, not the cerebral cortex, and so we are ruled by our impulses to action, while the cerebral cortex is only there as an application that fabricates what is only the sensation of consciousness, becoming spectator and critic, thinking it's the core of our spiritual being only because it's programmed to think that way, that it's watching and referencing all events from the first person's perspective, which doesn't need to be anything more solid than just being a subjective assumption, which could certainly be programmed into any sophisticated robot. The Cartesian, I think, therefore I am, should have been, I do, therefore I am. Not that there is anything wrong with thinking, no. It's not once the cerebellum has conditioned thinking to its will. For where else could intellectuals and poets come from, but from out of the conjunction of will with a way for words? Thank you, everybody. That's it for this video. That in the making of which it became more like one of my polished formal videos. Ow! I know that I promised you all my book by now, but I've had some delays. You can see that I recently moved, and my cats and I love the new place. But the moving took a lot of my time and attention, and I strained my right arm, making it painful to hold my hands up over the keyboard. But it's healed up enough, and I've gotten back to work. And I suppose I only need to go through one more read-through of what is now 65,000 words. That is, in order to assure that it's all of the highest literary quality. Yes, I won't consider it good enough to please you until it's first good enough to please me. But yeah, I'm getting more and more happy with it. So yeah, this video was me just screwing around. Now let me get back to work on my book. Heroic Army Super Clerks, the book that will heal America. Yeah. Thanks, Avery. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. How do you turn this thing off?